Well, this is going to be a good evening, and this is basically going to be a serious discussion about truth. The format of the tribunal is will help, but we're not going to push the metaphor too far. As you noticed, no one said please rise when I came in, and I can promise you no one will be charged with contempt. So let me first introduce the panel, and then we're going to do a polling on the motion that I couldn't put it on the PowerPoint on truth. So I will ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves briefly, but you have their bios in the summary that was on your seat. So I'll ask Andrea first.
Hello everyone, I'm Andrea Blanc. I have my own business called GEC Risk Advisory, where I provide ethics, culture, cyber governance, risk advice to boards and companies and NGOs and some government agencies as well. I used to be a corporate person. I was a general counsel and a chief risk, ethics, compliance, and a few other things officer for 4 different companies for about 20 years. And I'm a lawyer by training, but luckily I have shed myself of that skin. I don't practice law anymore. I've sort of opened up the boundaries of what I can do. So I'm delighted to be here. And
thank you. No, thank you. Then we'll go to Michael Schubert. He is going to play the role of the witness for the defense, and I forgot to mention, Andrea is going to be the witness for the prosecution. Michael.
Hi, so I'm Michael Schubert, and I head creative and innovation at Rudderfin, which basically means that I help companies from all different sectors figure out how to best tell their stories to publics, and I think truth plays a big part in that, and I know that every one of my clients thinks the same. And sometimes truth is a journey. You just don't always know what the truth is. It's not necessarily so black and white to begin with, but I think that it's our goal as communicators and the goal of our clients to always strive to find the truth and communicate the truth in the best way possible. And anybody who doesn't do that doesn't deserve to be in the industry and should go home. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we're going to ask Jim Lukaschewski, and he's going to play the role of the prosecutor.
Speaking of which.
I'm Jim Lukaschewski, prosecutor. I've been a member of PRC, I was thinking the day, for 42 years. My wife and I lived here in New York, and my business was here for 30 years, and we were members of the New York chapter and several chapters around the country. But my business is trouble. I'm always looking for bad news, other people's bad news, and made really quite an interesting living about helping other people resolve the issues that, for problems that they by and large brought on themselves. And truth is kind of crucial to my business because everybody who talks to me is basically lying from the start. And the difference, when you've been doing this work for so long, you tend to know exactly what's going on the moment you have a sense of what the problem happens to be. So it's actually very hard to work with me because when you call me, I give you a sheet of paper, has 9 items on it, and it's called Seeking Forgiveness. And the reaction is often, Jim, we have a crisis here, we can't do a list of 9 things. But if you look at those 9 things, you know if you had a mother, these are the things you're supposed to have been doing when you were doing something you weren't supposed to be doing and you knew you weren't supposed to be doing. So it's going to be fun to be a prosecutor tonight.
Thank you. And now our guest, T.J. Elliott, will play the role of the defense counsel.
So I'm not in the public relations industry, and that may become more apparent the longer I speak. I, for 15 years, was the chief learning officer at Educational Testing Service, and now I work there as a knowledge broker in R&D. So there is this interest in truth, but truth be told, I'm here because my very dear friend Robert Burnside, who was the chief learning officer at Ketchum for many years, has decided sensibly not to leave Milan, where he now lives, and so I'm his substitute, and I'm delighted to be here on such an august panel.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel. So now we're going to turn over to the jury, you, and I'm going to read to you the declaration I think you have, and we'll ask how many of you agree with that statement, and we'll try to have an estimate of public opinion. Truth is overrated, less relevant than ever, and rarely provides a competitive advantage in business. Therefore, we should not make truth a priority in the practice of our profession. So how many of you think it's a valid motion? 1, 2, 3. We will poll the jury once again at the end of the discussion, and we'll see if we have any, if we move the needle somehow. So I think now I'm going to start with the prosecution, and I'm going to ask you to make your opening statements about 5 minutes.
It's called Truth on Trial, but what's interesting about truth is that we're the people who have taken professionally on this responsibility of truth, so we're on trial, you're on trial tonight. Your attitudes, your beliefs, your practices are part of what the discussion is all about. And the profession has a large number of handicaps in carrying out this business of being the advocates of truth and the carriers of truth and the rest of it. And so we sort of want to keep some questions in mind about our own environment, your own environment, prosecutor, that keep the same character. And so I jotted down some thoughts from we work primarily with senior executives. And so we have conversations. I'm always asked about you and what you do and how you compare with other people in your profession. And we have some pretty candid discussions about these things. And so I think along with the main subject of the evening, we want to think about ourselves and yourselves and how you practice your profession and work through the issues we're going to talk about tonight. And these are interesting. How the public relations practitioners overcome their clients' belief that they are better communicators than any of us. Anybody work for a boss that thinks they're a bad communicator? So our relationship, your relationship with the people you consult with is very different than the accountant or the security people or the others who are the staff functions of the business. When you talk to a client, you're not having a conversation where they're learning anything. You're having a conversation where they are actually mentally dueling with you to see if your ideas are as good as theirs if you weren't in the room. It's an extraordinary circumstance to be in. On top of that, you are around when some of the most difficult and really awful decisions are made by very smart people. If you just run through your mind the various scandals that have been going on in the last couple of years with larger companies, there are practitioners, PR practitioners in those rooms at the top when these decisions are being made. And there's a problem here because we're there, but the decisions still get made. We have, PR has a wonderful code of ethics, but it seems like it doesn't actually exist at certain altitudes. And there's no one there to defend effectively those thoughts and ideas. That's what's going on tonight, to talk about as much about how we practice, you practice, and what's actually going on. The prosecution's main theory tonight is to demonstrate that essentially if this statement is true, and we're actually supporting this statement to some degree, that public relations is complicit in these situations and these circumstances. And we have to think about that. Because the truth is, we live in a world of lies. Almost everywhere you look, everywhere you work, somebody is not telling the truth intentionally. My personal philosophy after 40 years of working with perpetrators and other sorts of folks is that things that are immoral, illegal, inappropriate, improper. These are all intentional decisions made by adults. People don't, Volkswagen didn't accidentally, change the environmental controls on 800,000 cars. It wasn't 6 guys on a Saturday morning coming in and tampering with a few vehicles. This was a company-wide effort. Every manager, every supervisor, every leader was in on it from the start. They actually held seminars to teach other auto manufacturers how to do this. They advertised them in industry magazines. They got awards for these seminars. It's so, it's just so blatant. And I think part of what we want to really recognize tonight that, the defense of truth is pretty hard because there's not many people out there, including this profession, my judgment, who are really doing a job of defending it. And it's just a few examples. I start with the media. The PR is obsessed with fake news. Well, who is the largest producer of fake news on the planet? It's CNN. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, sometimes in panels of 12 people. They are busy making mountains out of molehills every day. And what is that? When you think about it, there's this sign on CNN that blinks and says, breaking news. This is the biggest lie of all when you think about it. If you think about Mr. Mueller's investigation and the coverage of that, remember they had like 7 seconds of him walking down this white corridor? How many times do you think we saw that? Thousands of times. But in essence, is that a true depiction of what's going on? In my judgment, to really be honest and transparent, CNN should put counters on these videos that they reuse constantly, sometimes thousands of times. So we know when it was originally shot, the 470,000th time we've seen it. So we have some sense as viewers of what this is about. You kind of think, well, does it really matter? It does matter, because it is a deception to keep showing the same video, and seeing that assuming though it happened today, perhaps, or whatever. It seems like it's it's kind of a nitpicking thing, but they do this constantly. They do the same stories at least 8, sometimes 12 times a day, but that sign is still blinking. At some point, it should change the word to stuff. Breaking stuff, right? Or something like that, because this is a lie. I mean, how many times do you get to broadcast it and say it's original broadcasting? But the issue also from my perspective about them is that they are creating the impression by the repetition of these stories, by the repetition of the fragments of these stories, that we're actually hearing something that matters. And if you watch CNN a lot, but you sit back at the end of the day and say, now, how much of this is going to wind up in a history book someplace? Virtually none of it. Got to think about this. And we should be talking about this. We need to, if we're going to talk about truth, let's talk about where truth begins. New York Times, about 11, 12 years ago, had a big ballyhoo about spending $12 million to analyze their database to identify errors in their data. And then we all waited with bated breath, those of us reading, we waited with bated breath for the report, which came out that they found literally millions of errors of all kinds in their database. But they decided that rather than purge the errors, they would keep them in the database. And I don't remember what the excuse or the reason was. It made no sense. It was not memorable, but it's the New York Times. They can do what they want. And they're constantly promoting truth and using it as a leverage, an advertising lever. But, this is a newspaper that uses more anonymous sources in a single day than all the daily newspapers in America combined every day. They defend the practice. No other medium uses as many, and no, they don't defend the practice the way the New York Times does. We have the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times covering the same stories every day, but somehow we wind up with different information from both. We have Fox News and CNN and other broadcast outlets, again, covering the same stories, and yet for some reason, something comes up differently than the past. So different than we expect. I mentioned Congress, but that needs no explanation. Lying in business. We're constantly struggling with understanding what's being sold to us and what the data and information is. Because we don't get enough information really to find that out or know that. And often when we do, we find out that it's not what it was purported to be over time.
Maybe we should.
There's lying to vulnerable publics. My wife was ill for many years, and she ran the house and ran our businesses as well, by the way, and loved it, but she became too ill to do that, so it fell to me, and I have to admit, Math and I have never been friends. So I was going through the checking account, just an interesting story, and I noticed a bunch of charges there that I didn't recognize for $20, $25, and the charge accounts we have, the credit cards, they list a phone number with every charge. So I called this one number, an 800 number, a lady answered, and I said, can you tell me what this charge is for? She said, it's for security. I said, what do you mean security? Well, she said security. I said, well, how did we get this charge? She said, your wife agreed to it. And she showed me that she didn't show me. She told me the date. And I said, well, what did my wife do to authorize this charge? And she said, well, in reality, we asked her if her last name was on it. Her last name on the maturity center was spelled correctly. If she said yes, we started charging for it.
All right.
Okay, so the bill had 11 $20 charges, all right? I called the next number, guess who answers the phone? She does, different number. She recognized my voice, and because I told her to cancel it. She said, I canceled it the moment I heard your voice. Okay.
Okay.
Of the 11 numbers, 6 were from her. And as soon as she heard me each time, like, cancel, you're all done, don't worry about it, it's all off the books, right? And
Okay.
this is just one person who's in their 60s or 70s.
I think we have to go to the,
Go for it.
before we're too depressed, we have to go for the defense of the truth. An opening statement.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, members of the tribunal, for this opportunity. Being counsel for the defense of Old Truth seems to me like representing a bank robber who pulled the job wearing a name tag, and no mask, at his sister's tower window. It's hard to deny these days that the truth is guilty of something, even if it's only going AWOL. And Jim has presented many, many things that the truth is not doing for us. And I just want to say for a moment, being opposite Jim here, as if the fact of the truth's weaknesses wasn't bad enough for me, I'm on the same stage with somebody who's written dozens of books. I've written 1.5. It was through academic publishers. Jim received the PR News Lifetime Achievement Award. I'm pretty sure the last award I received was the Perfect Attendance Award from St. Francis of Assisi in 1965. Jim is a member of the Rowan University PR Hall of Fame. The closest I ever got to any Hall of Fame was visiting Cooperstown. But all of what I just said is true. And you care that it's true. You wouldn't have showed up here if all of a sudden somebody told you, oh, that thing about Jim and the Rowan University Hall of Fame all made up his books written by a squad of Canadian ghostwriters. It wouldn't have had the same effect upon you. You care about the truth. So it's important to remember that tonight, the motion that you're looking at here is not whether there are lots of people lying. I would not have signed up to defend the New York Times, CNN, Fox News, Breitbart, anybody else there. We're not trying them. What you're being asked to do tonight is to take a look at 3 specific charges that are in the motion, and I want to address them one by one. The first of those is that the truth is overrated. Now, I admitted at the beginning I don't come from the world of PR, but in my world, the truth is underrated. Not enough people know the difference it makes in the life of a 4th grader in Flint, Michigan, or a doctoral program applicant from Indonesia to have the truth about them come out. If the truth about them and what they can do and what they need doesn't register, then their abilities go unrecognized and their opportunities crash and burn. The truth is underrated because we take it for granted. For example, what if on our next trip we didn't know the truth in our assessment of the ability of the candidates who can respectively fly the plane control air traffic, and maintain jet engines. Possessing that truth constitutes a major reason why fatal aviation accidents last year were less than 40% of what they were annually 10 years ago, less than 25% of what they were in the year 2000. The truth is underrated, and the truth is relevant, unlike what the motion says. In fact, if I can stay with aviation for a moment, and here now I will be entering into the realm of PR, if we had gotten a little more truth, those statistics would be even better. If Boeing executives had not failed to speak the truth, which Jim has certainly alluded to there, or perhaps more generously to seek the truth about the realities and deficits of their systems, which caused 2 deadly crashes of the 737 jetliner, killing 346 people, our truth-powered systems would have done even better. The truth is relevant. It's really, really relevant for the families of those 346 people. And as to the third charge in the motion, the truth is essential in competitiveness. The truth is a competitive advantage in business if you focus on profit and loss as a predictor and measure of competitiveness. Using Boeing again as an example, that company projects an $8 billion charge to settle wrongful death suits. Other companies are suing them, other countries are canceling their contracts, and their credit rating may soon dive out of control like those tragic 737s. The political sphere, as several have mentioned already, is beyond the bounds of this charge, but I do want to quote something that William Davies wrote recently. The crisis of democracy and of truth are one and the same. Individuals are increasingly suspicious of the official stories they are being told and expect to witness things for themselves. Is the end of democracy good for business? That's for another tribunal to determine. But the suspicions of individuals, heightened by attitudes and actions in which the truth is considered irrelevant, do matter in this context. If we wish to persuade someone, to influence them, then eventually we wish to know if our efforts are making a difference. In other words, we'd like to know the truth, which appropriately, necessarily will be rated highly, boast relevance, and aid competition. The truth serves our own interests in the long run. Does the truth change? Yes, everything changes. And there are times when the truth does not carry the day. Only a fool, and Mrs. Elliott didn't have any fools for children, would defend the premise that equivocation never works, that mistruths never confer advantages. The truth is neither undefeated nor indispensable, except when the poop hits the propeller. Then truth, which we may have ignored, derided, or even twisted, catches up to all of us. And at that moment, when we are in crisis, the truth is essential, relevant, and highly advantageous. It is our highest priority. In fact, at those moments, to quote a foremost expert on dealing with such public relations crisis, the most important question to ask about what is purported to be going on is it the truth? Yes. You can hear Jim Lukashevsky saying in the splendid reel on his website that the most important question is it the truth? And that's the truth.
So, Andrea, now we need your reflection on the topic.
Well, I'm going to tell the truth to begin with about me, which is that I'm on the wrong side of the table. I'm going to do my best to remain objective and useful to the jury. So I'm going to give you my take on what I think the truth is. And I think the truth is often in the eye of the beholder. So if who here has seen the Japanese movie by Akira Kurosawa called Rashomon? Okay, so in that movie, 5 different truths are told by 5 different people who see 5 different things happen in the woods. And I saw that movie maybe 30 years ago, and it really made an impression on me. And I also remember in my early days as a general counsel, when I was for the first time an executive in a company, my leadership style was to have an open door policy. So I quickly became the person to whom all came for bitching and moaning and all kinds of other things. So I had this open door that allowed everybody to come in and tell me their story, their side of the story So I had like a Rashomon-like experience with things that would happen around in the company. I learned that I needed to be a little bit more reserved in my immediate judgment about things, because I learned also as general counsel I had to do investigations from time to time, and a few ethical issue investigations and compliance other kinds of investigations. So I learned quickly that I needed to wait for the perspective of the 2 or the 3 or the 4 other people who were involved in that particular incident or issue. And so one of the things I would like to just sort of leave you with is that while the truth is in the eye of the beholder, you have an obligation to really pursue that truth by building the due diligence and the information that you have. And I think I've worked with a lot of PR professionals over the years, both within the companies that I work for, and then also now as a consultant to companies and organizations. And I think one of the things that's often missing from the equation is PR and other professionals that are relevant to the issue, general counsels, compliance officers, business people, are not talking to each other early enough in the process so that the information becomes well known, and then you can hopefully present the information that you need to present if it's a crisis or if it's some other kind of an issue. And so for me, this is a really important piece of the puzzle. I think the other piece of the puzzle for truth to be told in the way that is most useful to the organization without lying is for you to know all of the facts and then be able to communicate them well. And that's where the PR profession comes in very importantly. But that also requires all of us within companies and organizations to understand who are the stakeholders. And that goes back to that Rashomon analogy that I was making, which is, do you know who your stakeholders are in the issue that has occurred? So if you are an oil and gas company, you may have environmental issues, social issues, supply chain, human rights, etc., corruption, if you're doing business in corrupt countries, including our own, of course. And so if you know what your issues are and you know who the stakeholders of the issue are, then the reputation management and the crisis management becomes a lot more, much more effective. So I'm a big advocate in telling the truth, but in a way that is measured. There's a lot of due diligence that goes into it, a lot of interdisciplinary communication, and truth-telling sometimes is the best solution when there is a crisis and when there are issues like the Boeing issue or any of the other crises that we've seen over the years. Telling the truth as you discover it actually creates trust. And trust and truth, I think, are 2 very important interrelated concepts. How am I doing?
I think you should have been on the other. I think you should have been on the other side.
I'm sorry, I'm piling on over there, but I have to tell the truth.
Exactly. Thank you. It was refreshing. Michael.
So I'm going to pick up where you left off.
I'm sorry.
And first of all, the idea of defending the truth just seems absurd to me, because there's just a fundamental ethic about, it's the truth. We should all aspire to telling the truth. But going farther than that, getting to the point of the charge here that it's overrated. It's not overrated. It does have value, that it's relevant. Yes, it's important. And that it gives you a competitive advantage. So why is that? And as my counterpart just pointed out, there's the relationship between truth and trust. So we are in the industry of public relations. What does public relations mean? It means it's how you relate to your publics. And I'm going to think about it in terms of businesses and institutions as opposed to politics, but I think it applies to all of those, right? It's how you relate to your publics. And the most important thing in having a relationship to your publics is trust. And as Aesop told us, in his fable about the boy who cried wolf, what happens when you don't tell the truth multiple times? Then people don't trust you anymore. And then you don't have a relationship. So when you need help, it's not there. When you need to make the case, it's not there. So trust is crucial. And trust actually does give you competitive advantage. So I was doing a little research going into this, and one of the things I came across was Accenture did a study called the Competitive Agility Index. This is looking at 7,000 companies. It's very impressive, the depth of it. And they measured trust, and then they looked at, and I'll find the thing here, how it tangibly quantified in a decline in stakeholder trust impacting company financial performance. And what they found is that 54% of companies who had a drop in trust also had a drop in their shareholder value. $130 billion in missed revenue. So that's competitive advantage. They had a 6% negative growth impact and a 10% negative EBITDA impact. That's competitive advantage directly connected to trust. Okay? And then you go a step further. So who are the most important people to companies today? Well, you have your consumers and you have your employees, right? And employees. Let's take a look at that, because that is, for almost any company today, the single most important factor in success. And it's becoming harder and harder to get good employees and retain good employees. And what we're seeing, especially in the most prized employees, which are millennials and now starting to Gen Z, we're seeing 70 to 80% say that they want to work for a values-based company, a company they can trust. Okay, and we're seeing the same thing with consumers. We at Reuter Finn have done a survey recently, and that we're going to be publishing shortly, looking at 5,000 consumers, and over 50% of them in this survey have told us that they have taken action in the last 6 months of some kind against companies that they have seen as unethical or dishonest. Over 50%. And what's interesting is that we've looked at other surveys where, as you get younger and younger, Gen Z say they won't purchase. 80% of Gen Z says they're not going to purchase from a company that they can't trust. So the only argument, the only real argument for not telling the truth is that you think you're going to get away with it, right? That you can not tell the truth and maintain trust. And I have one word that argues against that, and that word is whistleblower. And we can think about whistleblower in the news today and yesterday and these past weeks, but in this day and age, anybody and everybody is a whistleblower, because whether you're an employee or a consumer or somebody just passing on the street, you have a camera in your pocket. You're one click away from being your own reporter, being your own journalist, and being able to post anything, anywhere, right? So think about, Sandra Fowler, one blog post against Uber, right? And the next thing you know, we have hashtag delete Uber. And look at the impact on that. And we've seen what happens when, not just like formal legal whistleblowers. How many pharma companies have had impact on FDA reviews or corporate or legal actions against them based on what employees have written in Cafe Pharma? Not because that's the end thing, but because the media looks at that and then they start to dig. So we live in a world today, the very media, the very phenomenon that makes fake news an issue that can be disseminated so radically also makes the truth more important, because if you don't tell the truth, somebody is going to point it out. And it's someday, maybe not at the beginning, but it's someday, it's going to catch up to you.
Thank you very much. So now is the time for the jury to ask questions to the panel. Now you may ask a question to the panel in general or to individual on the panel. It's up to you. So this is basically a Q&A period. Yes, sir.
If I may. Do you mind? So we can believe in the truth, but commerce is about making money, And so many corporations will find shortcuts, tell out-and-out lies, and try to hide the truths, Boeing as an example, and they go on and on. But the idea of, if it's not found out, if there is no leak, if there's no whistleblower, then what is it about the truth that matters there? Because in the world in which we live, it's so often the case that the truth does not come out. And so hiding something makes commercial sense. I put it to the panel.
Who would like to answer? You took the mic.
I'll just say that I think it goes beyond what is successful commercially. It's how do you feel about yourself as a professional. That is party to a lie.
We live in America.
Yeah, I know we do. I grew up in Europe. But I actually think there's something to be said, and I think the millennials and the Z generation are a lot more like the Europeans, let's say, when it comes to business. And I think we're living through a transition period where our capitalism is changing somewhat because of those pressures from the millennials and from the fact that social media is outing everything. And there is that whole other piece of the puzzle beyond social media. A few years ago, I wrote a book on reputation risk, and I subtitled it The Age of Hyper-Transparency. And now I think we've reached the age of super opacity because of fake news and fake everything. The deep fakes, the videos, everything else that's being thrown at us. So that's a truth issue that I think is really a serious problem and challenge for all of us as people. Why would we want to be fed a fake politician speaking to us lies or other kinds of things that we maybe know that they don't do, or vice versa, right? So I, for one, am very traditional. I want to know what the truth is. And I think it is a business advantage if you want to sleep at night.
Yes.
So my question is, if to the points of the panel, that, for example, talking about Boeing, and at the end of the day, the CEO did a mea culpa and that kind of thing, and fessed up. However, Boeing's still in business, and except for cases like Enron, it seems like the truth maybe isn't accountable enough. There is no accountability for, we made a mistake, or the whistleblower, there's only a certain part of the business that did that, and it's not really the full company's brand that's at stake here. So we've become so good at fixing these untruths that I think we're in a place as a society that's extremely dangerous.
And probably PR were asked to help fix those problems.
The single most powerful reason why companies survive and individuals survive is because we as a society, as a society, it is on. As a society, and this is true, really, I've worked in not every culture, but many cultures. The enabling factor is that people don't speak up. And, I went to a demonstration one time, it was a meeting about vision and values and these kinds of statements companies have. Every company, every company of any stature has something like this. Every company you can mention on a list of crummy companies and bad companies has some kind of vision values statement. And you can throw them all in the same, this is what the speaker did, he threw them all in a bucket and pulled them out and read them and essentially dared the audience to identify specifically who it was for. You couldn't do it because they're just all the same, they're meaningless. They can be meaningless because, what you're talking about is not happening. This notion of the power of truth and the rest of it. I mean, for most employees, the number one goal for the day is to get home on time. It's not to enforce the code of conduct in the company. Drives business people crazy when you hear that, but studies I've done and studies others have done demonstrate that the leaders of the organization don't make this important, and at the same time they are working on doing things that aren't really appropriate for what the company is doing. By the way, on the Boeing thing, the New York Times wrote a 25,000-word article that appeared in the New York Times Sunday magazine, I think 3 weeks ago, to explain what happened at Boeing. And if you read the article, it demonstrates the pattern of these large companies and of large brains, not necessarily large companies. And the steps they went through, I see replicated every single time. You know, they started with blame shifting. First of all, they started by saying nothing. Then they started by being angry about, we're Boeing, and we're a good company. You know, then they blamed other people. Then they made up other issues. Then they got mad again. You know, this is the behavior of people with power, for one thing. And all the while, all these people at Boeing aren't saying anything, and thousands of people were aware of the issues that the shortcuts they took and all the rest of it. Nobody spoke up.
Just to reinforce the point I made before, I think when you take new employees or potential employees and they look at the ratings of companies, whether it's Glassdoor or something else, Harris Poll, what have you, the companies that have the most retention, long-term retention, and the least sort of turnover are the ones that have a great culture. And the great culture comes from the great leader. We don't have a lot of great leaders. That's part of the problem. And so you have a lot of mediocre leaders who don't really think culture is important. And that's when whistleblowers aren't able to blow the whistle properly, because before you blow the whistle, if there's a speak-up culture to begin with, where problems get resolved early on, it's a much better culture. Now, some leaders know that and they do something about it. Many leaders don't. And many leaders are also very authoritarian and aren't interested in hearing speak up or solving problems. So I just wanted to add that as a thought.
And I just want to, I disagree with your point. I think that Boeing, as one example, they may not go out of business, but it's not like they aren't going to have punishment for this. I mean, there's a far cry between getting let off scot-free and the death penalty. And you know, just as Rashomon tells us that there are different stories for everything, you know, companies can be good companies in some ways and not good companies in other. And two opposing things can sometimes be true, okay? And I'm not saying that to argue that you don't have to be truthful, but in this case, I mean, many things are going to happen. If you're a shareholder in Boeing, you feel the pain, right? If you're if you're the person trying to recruit talent at Boeing, you're going to feel the pain, right? And Boeing probably will not make the same mistake again. So there are corrective measures that result from this. And I disagree with the previous point that you know, people do it all the time and it works. I don't think it works, and I think it works less and less and less. And this is going to seem like an obscure reference, but Oliver Sacks did these studies of people who had limited cognitive value and just had their sort of, or cognitive sensibility and just had their sort of emotional responses. They weren't able to think. And he put on various politicians, I don't want to get into names, you know, on the television in front of them. And when these politicians were lying, these patients started to laugh. And they did so because I think we have built in ourselves the ability to sense when somebody or a group of people isn't telling the truth. And that will build up over time. And if a company is feeding you a loaded bowl, just like a politician is feeding you a loaded bowl, I think people are going to get it. They may decide they still want to buy the product anyway, right? They may decide, I know that person's dishonest, but I'm choosing that person over this person for another set of reasons. That may be the case. But I don't think that anybody long-term gets away with consistent lying.
Yeah, please.
Allow me to present a slightly different picture. I think that somebody said it already, that truth is a work in progress. We approximate truth. One very good example is, if you like, our vision of the universe, and from the book of Genesis through Einstein to, in fact, modern theories about infinite progress of universes. So obviously we don't have truth in our hands, except in very limited sense. The distinction, the difference is between those that seek earnestly to approximate truth, take an ethical position, and those that use truth instrumentally. And I think that there is a big problem now, because reading the press, for instance, you see how people use facts, or non-facts or fiction, and use them totally instrumentally for a purpose, to make a point. And why is this so prevalent? Why? Because from the 1980s onwards, our system of values has put efficiency and effectiveness at the top of the pyramid, and everything else below. If you can make a point and succeed in making this point and sell a product, whatever the quality of the product, then you are rewarded. If you don't, you fail and you're pushed aside. And I cannot stop myself watching television, and the advertisements, which are really baffling, to say the least. Especially the ones on pharmaceuticals. You never know what is good for you. I mean, how. But on the other hand, if I had, in other words, to trust the advertisements in buying medication, I would probably be dead. But I trust my doctor. I know that my doctor does not necessarily hold the whole truth, but at least I trust him to the extent that he is an ethical professional. That's, I think, basically the problem.
Can I give a thought?
Go ahead, yeah.
I think what
Then
you just hit
Jim.
was a really interesting point, which is that truth is also about judgment. You trust your doctor because you trust your doctor's judgment, that he cares for you. You are his most important stakeholder. And so he's going to do his best, or she's going to do her best, to give you the care, the medicine, whatever it is that you need to stay healthy. And I think that's part of what we're talking about here, is not just truth, because it is in the eye of the beholder a little bit, and we can never have complete truth. But if you have trustworthy individuals who have good judgment, who are working with you, then you can approximate the truth, I think.
Jim.
I'd just like to draw from practical experience that some of us may identify with practical experience of being in public relations and dealing with journalists. Journalists do not expect the truth from public relations people. They perform, as we do, PR people, a delicate dance around the truth. And we have our jobs because we are the buffer between the truth and the public, really. I mean, that's why we're there. So that we push that limit, or we do our dance to the point at which credulity is not strained, so much that the journalists won't call us back for a quote the next time, or that we can't, talk to them, we can't give them a press release and have them talk about our new product or division. And I don't think the readers of a newspaper or the audience of a TV news show expects the truth either, because they're not stupid. The journalists are talking about things that are not direct truth statements, as you would recognize. If you quiz people, even us, as to what's truthful and what's not, it's not. It's a half-truth. It's a talk about some evidence that's out there. It's a talk about, in this case, like, well, there's going to be a vote going on something. So this truth implied or a position implied or that type of thing. So that's why I would go with the statement that it is overrated, despite the fact that the truth might, as this professor said here, might be something that we can't arrive on anyway. I mean, we even have the audacity to call up a journalist, or the journalist calling up us, to say, hey, would you speak off the record or for background? And then we tell them the truth, and they still don't report it. I mean, this is it's a sham in every respect, and yet it's also the way that that's why we're hired. That's the competitive advantage we have as a professional going from one job to the other. Because if I told the truth in my new job as Senior Vice President for Communications, I'd last the case.
Oh, she wants the mic.
Yeah, go ahead. Take
Yes,
the
please.
microphone.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm thinking about the third member of the prosecution tonight, who also spoke from a witness stand in a courtroom, the actor Jack Nicholson, who shrieked, "You can't handle."
The truth, yes.
And part of me, we shrewdly tried to skirt politics here tonight, as we should. So without referring to any of the personality principles, I'm thinking about a body of people who, there's a strong possibility as things go where they're going politically here, who are, going to, the true believers are going to have a truth jammed up their nose, which they made a big mistake. And they placed their bets and their hopes and their dreams on a crook who cares nothing about them. But let me stop there, not to get too much. And I'm just wondering how the opposing party, from a public relations point of view, is going to handle how much can you jam up people's nose that you were wrong? How much can you afford to do that? I've spent about 40 years producing theater, opera, music. And so the point of that is that I've spent 40 years listening, watching, but even feeling the reaction of an audience. When that moment of authenticity, which is a word that I've been thinking about for the last hour, when authenticity, when that ring of crystal is heard, you go down with a spoon ringing a bunch of cheap glass, and then you hit that crystal glass, and you hear that ping, and you know that's the truth. And to hear and feel an audience swoon, as I did a few nights ago at Tribunal at the Met. And yeah, audiences responded to talent, a great singer, doing their best and moving you. But again, in 40 years, that's not what I've felt an audience move by. It's when they hear authenticity in the singer, when they hear a human expression, that's the truth. It's the truth of the character, of course, but it's also the truth of the singer. So that thing of authenticity has been on my mind all night. I wonder if the panel has any thoughts about it.
I'd like to first respond to that, because as the conversation has gone on here, I think there's a danger of believing that there is some substance called the truth that is out there. And I'm not defending that notion. I'm defending the notion that the truth is not overrated, and it is relevant, and it is a competitive advantage. So I think you've raised a point of the truth being something that requires some consensus. And to your specific point about, well, if you've got one group that now has this idea of the truth, and this other group is going to be really offended by it, it's really going to cause them such stress because it knocks out their beliefs and their mottos and their faith and things there. That's not going to happen by shoving it up their nose. It's going to happen by figuring out a way to get to consensus. And I think this is true around the issues of Boeing as well, because Boeing is such an interesting case, and you mentioned, Jim, the long article that's there, and I read a couple of different things there. We're not done yet. So this idea that truth is somehow reached in some way, one of the things I said in my opening statement is that the truth does change. We're not done yet. There are a lot of different fragments. There are a lot of different forces that are involved in this here. But I agree with Michael, and not just because on my side of the table. I think eventually the consensus will be that things were done wrong, that they need not to be done that way. And eventually, there will be significant consequences. I have to admit that Jim is probably right, and because of his position and his extraordinary career, probably afterwards, maybe over a glass of wine, will tell me several instances where it never did come out to that. But even if that's the case, that simply makes truth all the more valuable.
So I just want to chime in on something you said, because you said something that rang really true to me, and then something else struck me. So I create theater, or I've created theater in the past, and I agree. There's nothing like when you're sitting in the audience and an actor or a singer, whoever it is, speaks or pronounces those words or does that action, and it doesn't ring true. The audience knows it, you know it, and everything else. And when it does, it's that crystal pang. But authenticity and truth are not the same thing. And the very gentleman that you were talking about is President of the United States today, not because he tells the truth, but because people thought he was more authentic, right? And he is authentic, right? I mean, he is constantly, because he believes in his own self or whatever, or is a really good actor, I don't know. But authenticity is probably that man's greatest trademark. And so what's going to be interesting to see is the battle between authenticity and truth. And and you know, what happens to your authenticity if the fact that it's not truth has been exposed, and we'll find that out.
You talked about
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
the issue we're facing in the situation you're talking about is the prevalence of the bald-faced prevalence of continuous lying. And the lies are pointed out. In fact, as the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times published, I think, a page of in one point type of the lies for the given month, every month of the year.
And the Washington Post runs their Pinocchios.
That is, what we're seeing in this circumstance is that the nation is polarized because these lies, many of them are becoming the truth to many people because they're so widely reported and they're so widely repeated. I've actually advocated the news organizations that they stop broadcasting him in real time and broadcast him on tape delay. Mm-hmm. So that when some director who's doing the directing of the program, they can bleep him, like, you know, if you said some bad word would be bleeped out. When the line comes down, he gets bleeped. But you know, he is. The other thing is, I think Ted Koppel said this in the Washington Post article a time ago. The American media is hypnotized and addicted to this man, and the public is hypnotized and addicted to this man, regardless of what his behavior happens to be. He's changing the rules, and it really is interesting going forward how that's affecting how other people play the game. In response to the comment about some of these things never get resolved, almost every crisis situation I've been involved in 42 years, it never gets resolved. Because when the media stops paying attention, the organization, the perpetrators, you might say, feel they're off the hook. And some of those practices then continue. But really the biggest issue from a business perspective is that in today's world, the people who run things are paid, and you know, beyond handsomely, and they're paid in every circumstance. They're paid to come, they're paid to stay, they're paid when there are mistakes, they're paid to leave, they're paid to keep their mouths closed. There is so much revenue here, driving really so much business and so much activity at this level. And if you notice, you know, no one is going to jail in America today. The founder of Volkswagen is going to prison, but that's in Germany. But in the U.S., what we do is we charge big fines Two of the biggest banks in the country each paid $1 billion fine to the bank regulatory group, whichever one it is. At the end of last year, they're going to pay it again probably this year too, because they're having trouble with so much continuous and uncontrollable misbehavior. The government can't control it, but they still will not put somebody in prison. There's an argument for that.
I hear that. I would argue that today, in addition to the income that people get, companies get, the relationship they have with their employees and the relationship they have with their publics becomes more and more important. And yes, there was a time, for a long time, an issue would kind of disappear. But what we see more and more is because once something is out there, it lives. It doesn't go away. You can't erase it. It's permanently on the internet. And those conversations come back, and they come back, and it takes somebody to reignite the fire and relink. And so things don't go away. They don't disappear. And if you don't do something to address it and get on the right side of that conversation, it will come back and haunt you years later.
A great example of that, somebody mentioned Uber and the blog post.
Mhm.
Well, that was the crowning moment of 2 years of
Yes.
bad news that didn't break through. And it finally, that blog was the
Mhm.
catalyst of what happened to that company, and then created all the other major changes.
Absolutely.
Removing Kalanick and bringing in the new CEO and all these things.
And I, by the way, I think I accidentally said Sandra Fowler. Her name is Susan Fowler, so I apologize.
Thank you for the correction.
May I go?
Yes, just 1 minute, and then I have someone in the back. Go ahead. No, Leslie, go ahead.
Leslie, you first.
I wanted to make 2 points. James, your point about the journalists not
We can't
trusting,
hear her.
not
Make it
expecting the
closer.
truth from the media.
You have
I'm
to
gonna
put the
take issue with
microphone
you.
closer.
Leslie, we can't hear you.
Put the
Right up to
microphone
your
closer to you.
James, I want to take issue with you on journalists not expecting the truth from PR people. I'm going to stand up in defense of PR people because I have many relationships with a lot of journalists. I'm sure many people in this room do too. And when they call me, they expect accuracy. They get accuracy. They expect facts. Yes, that I may spin it a little, but that doesn't mean I'm not telling the truth. And I do believe that our profession does really try to do that. I'm not saying some journalists aren't skeptical, but I really do believe that most of us stand for accuracy and fairness. And I want to make one other comment about the media. One of the reasons I believe, and I'd like the panelists to discuss this as well, that 20% trust, the Americans, 20% of Americans trust, what they read in the papers. The media has been complicit in reporting over and over and over again things that are either not true or questionable. And it's only been in the last year or so, year and a half, that many of the major media have turned it around. So does anyone want to comment on, has the media been complicit in not telling the truth or in overblowing many of the stories and telling them over and over again when the facts have not been established?
Who wants to reply from the panel? And then,
There's a really wonderful comment from Alan Rusbridger, who was for 20 years the editor of The Guardian, that is very specific to, I think, what you're talking about there. And it was an admission that he made. He's editor of The Guardian, he's got a great online presence, it's an important journal, and he realized that chaotic information was free, good information was expensive. And therefore, chaotic information was going to win that particular battle a lot of the time there. But I also think that even though, as Rusbridger said, that it was harder for good information to compete on equal terms with bad, he also pointed to the fact that this isn't the first time it happened. That we tend to view the state of journalism today as the state of journalism forever. And that's not true. The very notion of newspapers, and we've broached the political, so at least I can go into the political past, whether you want to talk about Jefferson and Adams, whether you want to talk about Andrew Jackson, whether you want to talk about the McCarthy era, there are times when the media got it wrong or didn't speak up there and then figured out how to get it right subsequently. So I happen to agree with Mr. Rusbridger that I think that there's this challenge of rethinking how we deal with this here. The media has, to a certain extent, been complicit, but to be fair to the media, it's not like there's a rule book. Or I should say, the rule book that's there does not match the game they are now playing.
There's somebody over there in the back. Go ahead. We need the mic. The guy over there.
On the question of consequences, one of the things that happens in relatively open markets is that a business that has been caught lying and had a share price crash is subject to a hostile takeover. And new management can come in, sweep out the old management. Now that may not happen with Boeing because it's an especially politically sensitive market and a global duopoly. But that also can't happen with Volkswagen because in Germany, hostile takeovers are almost impossible. The workers' board has got a veto on these things. Would things be better if some other markets were as open as in the US?
Well, I think you've made an excellent point here. Again, we keep coming back to this notion of what are the consequences of this here. I will say that an interesting example for me that's playing out right now is the example of WeWork. And so it does argue for the U.S. Markets working well. I think Uber is another example there. In the case of WeWork, there was I don't know if it was a deliberate attempt, but it certainly was not presenting the truth about the situation of that company. And as the truth became apparent there, the CEO was forced out. So I think that I'm much more familiar with the U.S. Economy or business structure than I am with other ones there, but I do think that actually makes the argument that the truth is really relevant when you get to those kinds of situations.
Thank you. You have somebody? One more. Yeah, one more question. We have to wrap up soon. I need to speak with the jury, and then we have Julia.
Our closing.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I have a loud voice. Hi, I'm Don Bates. I teach a course at New York University on ethics and the law and regulation for public relations purposes. And I have some lovely students here tonight. I'd like to ask you to put your hands up, please. Who are studying and took their time out to come here. They didn't have to. It's not an assignment, but they're interested. I'm going to put you all on the spot. If you could briefly tell them, as people that are going to be going into the business, what kind of behavior should they exude in terms of dealing with ethical issues?
I'm going to jump in since I was the chief ethics officer of several companies, and at the end of the day, do your due diligence before you go into the company. Do all the internet research you can, read up on their stories, read up on some of the rankings. Is it the best place to work? Does it not show up at all? I would say the most important thing is do your due diligence up front. And once you're in, if you encounter issues, make sure that you know who the players are. Is there someone you can confide in? Is your supervisor someone of trustworthiness? Are there other people there? Don't be shy about finding allies. And if you start smelling a rat because you can't speak up and people are trying to retaliate against you if you do, vote with your feet. I've done that once or twice myself.
I would add, be true to yourself. I think that's the most important thing, to listen to yourself and see what is your natural reaction. If you feel there's something wrong, then most likely there is something wrong. Ask advice, probably outside of the immediate work environment, and then you make a decision. And you can never be sure you made the right decision, but you'll have the comfort knowing that you went through the process, you tried, and then you did the best.
Okay.
I think the good news, working with a lot of companies, is that companies have made a lot of progress in the past couple of years with being open to this, with having places to go, whether they are private hotlines, whether it's through HR. I think we have the Me Too movement actually to thank for a lot of that, but it extends beyond issues of sexual harassment. And I think more and more, at least in this country, we're seeing that there's a lot of avenues for where people want to validly identify something wrong, and they will be listened to, and companies will be receptive to hearing and responding and investigating those complaints.
I just want to say, I'm not in the field, but I'm going to give you a piece of advice that the late Tim Russert claimed that he got from his one of his grammar school nuns. Always tell the truth, then you only have to remember one story. It works really well.
Julian.
Hi, my occupation is to show leaders around the world actually how to lead. We're in a turmoil, and there's been many incidents of turmoil throughout the history of mankind, but this is a very unique turmoil that's actually going on around the world. Niels Bohr, anybody know who he was? He was on the Manhattan. He had a phrase, he said, "Without realizing that which is opposite, there's no truth to anything." There was a particular word that some of the members here have been bringing up that doesn't require any argument. It's a bit like gravity and DNA. It's the word care. Care doesn't care whether you have an opinion about it, whether you're suffering anything, a Holocaust situation, or being downtrodden by abuse, whether you're being left out of your community, whether you're being left out of your society. Care will always be care. It doesn't need an argument. Right now, there's a major revolution going on between what would be called we the people and it's versus authority. And there's a big debate. We're not quite sure whether it's going to be one or not. Authority doesn't have to care. And it's now being sort of proven in that situation. We the people, or any person who's got a family or anybody who's been part of a family, which includes all of us, requires that care be taken. I have 2 grown-up children. By the way, I dropped out of school when I was 15 years old. I used to travel around the world. I led people to different desperate places all over the world as a youngster, and I built a very successful business out of it. When I grew up, when I had the privilege of seeing my children grow up, and my daughter's 26, my son is 23, I remember taking them out to drive in the middle of the night. And I said something to them. I stopped at a very dark corner, and I said to them something about truth and lying. I said, you're going to face up to situations whereby you will actually have to decide whether you're going to tell the truth or whether you're going to tell a lie. I said, either way, you're going to be responsible for the consequences. Governments and authorities are proving out that by the example of the turmoils that are going on all over the world, I don't think there's a country right now that isn't either having some form of turmoil or is about to have some sort of turmoil. But it's the consequences that each of us as human beings will have to be responsible for. Because like gravity, you can't negotiate care. Isaac Newton didn't invent gravity. It had already existed since the beginning of language, since the beginning of time. All he did was language it. I spoke to one of the 3 proponents of the human genome sequencing, Eric Landers, who's actually head of the Broad Institute in Boston. I said, you didn't invent DNA. DNA's always been around. You just languaged it into existence. The same with care. If we don't care, then the word truth and lie will be an ongoing argument, and there will be consequences. But right now, we the people are fighting against some form of an authority, and we will see what ends will be taken. I'd like to know what, in fact.
Thank you. So I think we have to wrap up. So before I go for a vote, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask myself a question in the panel. How many of you lie frequently? I lie frequently. When I click, I've read the above and I agree. So how many of you have changed your mind? Oh, yes? Go ahead. I see a hand.
I click and agree all the time too.
Okay, so
I have not read it.
back to the motion. Anybody supports it? There were 3 people in the beginning. There's 1, 2, 3. So we didn't change the opinion. So we have a few more minutes. I would like to ask the panel if you have any last statement you want to make.
Should I start?
Yes. It's called closing argument.
I loved what you said. I kind of work with the notion of everything we do has to do with the stakeholders around us, and it's about stakeholder care. So if it's a shareholder, you're making money for them. If it's a customer, you're giving them a good high-quality product. If it's an employee, you're giving them a good work environment and good pay. So I think this is really important, and I think extrapolating it up to the larger geopolitics that we're living in, the tone from the top means everything. And tone from the top within a corporation, within an organization, within a nation, within a mayor for a city, the tone that that particular leader sets and the culture that they create for the rest of their organization or territory has an effect on everybody in it. I grew up in Franco's Spain. I was a kid, and it was an authoritarian government. My mother grew up in Nazi Germany as a child and a teenager. My father fought in World War II against the Germans. I have that direct relationship with what leadership means to a country and what it means to people. And I think that we've not connected that enough in today's world. And I think the millennials and the younger people are doing that in their own way. They don't have the direct connection that I have to people who lived in those days. But they are bringing up this care issue in a much more real and pragmatic way. And so I think there's hope. But we have to fight. We have to fight for what's right, what's true, in terms of being able to piece it together. So I love what you said, and I hope the young people also fight with us for the right thing.
I just want to say briefly that what a privilege it's been to be here with so many interested folks. And so there was a line earlier that, perhaps has PR been complicit in this? And what you've been complicit in tonight is looking for the truth. So whether you voted for it or voted against it, somehow you felt it was relevant to come here tonight. And somehow you felt it was rated high enough to be worth your while to come here tonight. It's not about reaching a final state. It's about continuing to ask the questions. And that's what's really important. And it's been a great privilege to be part of this panel.
So we talked a lot about, or it's been referenced over and over, that truth is a journey. You talked about in physics, the great, striving to find a theory of everything to explain the universe. One of the things that I mentioned that we've been doing a survey to talk about, listen to consumers and to see how they respond to companies who are not ethical or don't necessarily take the stands or aren't honest in the ways that they would hope for. And a very smart colleague of mine said, we should put a question to this survey about, will you forgive? And I was astounded to see, I'm not going to tell you exactly the number, but it's very high. A huge majority of people say they will forgive a company. Okay, we're talking in this survey about companies. They will forgive a company for unethical behavior in their minds if that company takes a set of certain actions to correct. And I think that's really, really important, because yes, to your question, whether they lie a lot or lie a little, I think it's inherent to lie because it's the truth, and you don't, or it's a journey, you don't always know the truth. But the point is that if you lie and you come to realize and understand that you lie, the best thing you can do is come forward and take accountability for it, responsibility for it, and move forward, and people will forgive you.
Wonderful. Jim, last word?
Well, I mean, as a prosecutor, if the things you were talking about were done universally, especially the thing you were just talking about, people would come forward, I probably wouldn't have a job. And so it's been an interesting discussion from my perspective. I have a book coming out with a co-author. I'm 77, he's 84. It's about decency and about integrity and the rest of it. But we have this ongoing battle. He has run a very successful corporation his entire life, except for one 2-week period 31 years ago when he was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, which is how we met. How I meet most people, actually. But unlike a lot of people that I tend to work with, get to work with, he started out by blaming some named boss in Chicago for the problem, and he went on and on about this, and I'm listening, because basically when people start talking to me, they tell their own story, whatever it happens to be, and they want to know that I know what happened to them from their perspective. And when he was finished talking, I actually uncharacteristically asked him to be quiet. Typically they run out of gas after a minute or two. He was going strong at like 2 to 10 minutes. So I said, if you just give it a rest, and I just want to ask you one question. Okay, whose name is on the door? It's his name. He founded the company. And that sort of stopped him. And then I said, this is your problem. It's your responsibility. And the only person on this planet who can resolve it is you. This other guy's name will never be on any door for any reason. Your name's on it. Well, he hung up. He said, and this happens a lot. Well, thank you. I'll give it some thought, which means goodbye. I'm going to find somebody who can fix this for me. But he called back 2 days later and he said, I really been thinking about this, and I think you're really right. This is my problem. It's my fault that this happened. And of all the executives I've worked with over the years, he has been really the shining star. There have been many excellent executives I've worked with who learned lessons from these circumstances and made changes such as you described tonight. Our careers are so different because I've always worked in this environment where somebody's at fault, as I said earlier, and they actually are at fault for their own reasons. And he makes this point, and it's really validates what you were saying tonight. And then there are millions of companies in this country who do the things you're talking about or try to do these things. And there's only a handful of companies who behave really badly.
Well.
And there are consequences for this when it occurs. And they're often consequences that are imposed by people like me tonight. A successful prosecution. But the issue really in the circumstances I work in is that there are victims in every circumstance. And that's a really powerful factor in both resolving issues and understanding how these things come about. But it's been a very interesting discussion. I too am honored to be with you this evening and talk about these things. And I thought this was a very not usual public relations discussion, which I really liked. We talked about things that were substantive and not that we don't say things or we make mistakes or whatever the complaints are. The list of 16 complaints about you.
Okay.
This is really enjoyable. Thank you very much.
So, I know that companies often do pay the price for not telling the truth and do suffer the consequences. I want to thank Emmanuel in particular for organizing this and distinguished panel who've been so informative and so thoughtful. Really appreciate it. And particularly American Media, which again has been our terrific host. I'd like to see you all all one of our other events, check our website. Thank you.
Court dismissed.
I had a play.